Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the Starting Over podcast. I read your book some time ago now, and it had been the subject of many a dinner table conversation, in fact, with my husband. And I thought, I've got to get Dan on the podcast. So it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. I like the name of your podcast. Each one I do is a different name, different theme, and I think we start over every new moment.
That's true, and that's a nice optimistic spin on it as well.
Yes.
The opportunity that can present.
Right.
What is, though, a big starting over that you have had in your life that has perhaps shifted direction for you significantly, whether that be work or personally?
Well, I can think of several instances. When I was a young college student, I'd never really studied much in high school. Things came fairly easily. I followed my interests. But when I got to University of California, Berkeley, 30,000 people, thank goodness I had a gymnastics team of friends that I worked with. But my academics, really, I hadn't developed the discipline, and I was on probation, almost flunking out my first semester. And it was a wake-up call. I had to really make a shift because I wanted to stay eligible for gymnastics. And I didn't really have a life direction. I wasn't driven by a career orientation yet. So I just took what courses I needed to and wandered around at the time. So I had to study, learn study skills, type up my notes that I took, scribbled, organize them, highlight the books, and do all those things to actually apply myself. And my grade point went way up the second semester, and I realized I can survive here. Maybe I'm not as slow as I thought. So that was one major shift. It was like a starting over, even though it was really a continuation. I also was married for 8 years. Anyone who's read my books or familiar with my biography knows that. And it wasn't a marriage made in heaven. It wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't there. I was waiting perhaps for something I didn't know. So I was remarried soon after that 8-year period when my marriage ended. So that was definitely a starting over on a personal level. And the love of my life and I were celebrating our 49th anniversary later this year. So that was definitely a starting over and finding the person who was more compatible. And it changed the direction of my life. I have no idea what my life would be like had I not linked up with Joy. That's her name. And
beautiful.
Literally.
I think I'd heard somewhere a quote, I don't know if it was Warren Buffett or otherwise, when he was asked about the most important decision he ever made, somebody assuming that would be related to his work as an investor, in Berkshire Hathaway. And he said, no, the most important decision I ever made was the person I chose to marry.
Well, Socrates, not the old character that I write about in my first book, or that's in the movie version, the movie adaptation, but the actual ancient Greek apparently had a difficult marriage. And he used to tell people that, this is a quote from the ancient Greek, he said, by all means marry. And if you choose well, you'll be happy. And if you don't, you'll become a philosopher. And Socrates, as noted, was a philosopher. So yes.
To be fair, I think I took that path as well after a failed attempt at her first marriage, and then I suddenly became so much more philosophical and asking all of these deep questions. So I can resonate with that.
We both had that training wheel marriage, so to speak.
Oh, look, I think so many of us do.
I think
so many of us do.
And we did learn the lessons we needed to about ourselves. Many times we've seen parts of ourselves we're not too thrilled with through a relationship difficulty. So it's a wonderful form of self-knowledge and inquiry. It's the best seminar in town, relationships.
Isn't it?
And in fact, it took me 20 years to realize Joy wasn't criticizing me. She was improving me. And so once I opened up to that idea, then it was much more helpful.
Yeah. Something that you said about not knowing your path career wise and wandering around aimlessly as such. It made me think of this quote we often hear. It's a bit of a cliche where we say life is a journey, not a destination. And
Mhm.
many of us, we fixate on the destination, the goals, where we want to go, and forget to enjoy the process and the ride and the journey. And that is so true. And I think it's a very important point. But on the other hand, I think there's such an importance in striking balance, because I think the risk is if you don't set yourself a destination, you run the risk of wandering around aimlessly. So I was wondering whether that came up for you, because you said, I didn't know what path to choose for myself, what career to carve out. Did you ever arrive at a point where you were like, okay, this is where I'm going, and you could see forward for what has now been such an illustrious career and wild and wonderful life? But did you have that foresight?
No, I did not. And there's another cliche that we're like cars driving at night. We can only see as far as our headlight beams. And the analogy I used when I lived in Marin County, California, when I came home from the airport, I'd go through this tunnel with a rainbow painted over it. It was just lovely. Went through the tunnel. Then I went through Sausalito, over the hills, and then down into a valley, Mill Valley, it's called, in California. And then I went up over another hill, and it was down in Larkspur and Corte Madera, and then another hill, and then I could see San Rafael. And I didn't know what was ahead until I got to the top of that hill. And that's when I went, oh, okay, now I see the situation. So many times we try to make decisions, but it's like walking down a long block in New York City, trying to figure out which foot you're going to step off the curb with when you're only halfway down the block. It doesn't make as much sense. So I believe decisions are best made when we need to make them, not too much ahead of time, as much as we might like a sense of mental certainty uh, or security. Now, you mentioned, it's interesting because that was really in the Peaceful Warrior film adaptation of my book, where Dan follows Socrates, the old character, up to the top of this big hill. And that's when Dan, my character, has this revelation. Socrates, I just realized it's the journey that makes us happy, not the destination, since most of our life is the journey. Um, and that's as you pointed out, that there's some real wisdom there. Um, but without a destination in mind, there is no journey. As you noted, we just wander around. So 3 of my books actually deal specifically with life purpose and living purposefully. Something that I had to learn about, since I really, if ignorance is bliss, I was ecstatic as a young man, because I really just learned to follow my interests. And I advised my daughters, somewhat tongue in cheek, I said, do what you love and get someone to pay you for it. That's really good career advice, though it may be idealistic. Uh,
Possibly.
yeah. So I'd had to learn about purpose, and I've learned a considerable amount about, it's like when I watch my granddaughter crawling across the floor when she was an infant. She wasn't doing that to get a workout. Uh, she wanted her brother's shiny toy, and she wanted something. So even as young as infants, we have goals, something we want. And I think it is important to live purposefully based on where we're moving to. One of my books is called The 4 Purposes of Life. And I'm not going to go into all the purposes unless you want me to, but I will say the most important purpose, the final one. See, I can't know my cosmic purpose ultimately here by the end of my life, but I always know my purpose in this moment. I know my purpose right now, and you know your purpose in this moment. So we always know our purpose in a given moment. And by focusing on that and living purposefully, I think this is a way to live wisely and well. As a Japanese psychiatrist named Shoma Morita once said, 3 guidelines for living well. He said, accept your thoughts and feelings, positive or negative, as you would in meditation. Just accept them as natural to you in the moment. They're arising. Okay. The second thing is, what is your purpose? What is your goal or aim? Focus on that, a constructive purpose. And third, do what needs to be done in line with your purpose. Whether you're having the right thoughts or the right feelings, it's a action-oriented approach to
Yeah.
living, which is what I teach, because I believe we have more direct control over what we do moment to moment, how we move our arms and legs and our mouth, than we do over arising thoughts or emotions.
Isn't that one of the keys probably to self-mastery that we're all on this journey trying to work out, but our ability to do the things that we don't feel like doing, keeping the small promises to ourselves because that's the key to confidence and self-belief, all of this stuff that we know we should do and oftentimes fall short.
Oh, that's so true. In fact, here's something I learned from one of my mentors years ago. To progress toward our goals, we can choose one of two methods. We can find a way to quiet our mind, create empowering beliefs, raise our self-esteem, and practice positive self-talk to find our focus and affirm our power, to free our emotions and visualize positive outcomes so that we can develop the confidence, to generate the courage, to find the determination, to make the commitment, to feel sufficiently motivated to do whatever it is we need to do.
Right.
Or we can just do it. And life is always going to come down to what we do. And in fact,
Is this where we insert Nike product placement?
exactly. And
This
Nike,
episode is sponsored by Nike.
well, they got a hold of a very good saying, and it wasn't created by Nike, obviously.
Yeah.
But our lives right now, your life, my life, everyone's life is determined by what we've done over time. Not just the thoughts or feelings, though many people believe we have to have the right thoughts or the right feelings or motivation or inspiration to be able to do what we do. But actually, we can just do it. We've all taken the trash out when we weren't feeling like it, or changed a child's diapers, or walked them to school when we weren't really motivated to do it, but we did it because it needed doing.
Yeah.
And that is what makes a difference between people who are more successful and people who aren't. Though they're waiting for the right feelings or thoughts or techniques or hacks, whatever it is today, in order to do what they need to do. Somebody came up to me once and said, Dan, I don't know, what about, something about hearing your talk. I feel so inspired. I said, don't worry, it'll pass. Because inspiration
How
comes
inspirational.
it comes and goes.
I
Motivation.
bet you put out his fire.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. When we're not relying on the inspiration, I guess that is probably what separates the achievers from those who aren't performing as well as they would hope to.
Well, people have asked me, what inspired you to write your book? I've written 18, by the way. Most people talk about my book, which is Way of the Peaceful Warrior, but I have written, and I didn't write another book for 10 years after Peaceful Warrior. I felt I'd shared what I had to say. And but then new mentors came into my life and a lot of information that really excited me. I wanted to share with other people. So that's what generated the second, third, fourth, and all the other books. And
the point of that being that you did that when you didn't feel like it, or what?
Yeah. People ask me, what inspired you to write your books? Jack London once said, never mind inspiration, go after it with a stick. It's like, or another writer, I don't remember his or her name, but that writer said, I only write when I'm inspired, and I see to it I'm inspired at 9 a.m. every morning. That's a joke, of course, but you just have to sit down and start hitting the keyboard. I go through about 6 phases. The first one I call the pre-procrastination phase. I'll get to procrastination later, but right now I'm not ready to do that. Then the procrastination phase, then the involved phase where I'm actually typing. And then finally the interested phase where I'd rather write than sharpen pencils. And then the immersion phase where I don't want to be bothered. Then that's followed quickly by the desperation phase. And finally the book is done.
Mm-hmm. Procrastination. So Let's go to that because it is something that so many of us experience, and it's symptomatic of fear. Essentially, it's an avoidance of our fear. And going to what we said before about the success, what determines when somebody's successful or not, I think there is a degree of self-mastery in being able to overcome such emotions in order to do what needs to be done. And fear is a big block for so many people. So have you ever felt this yourself? And if you do, what are some of your tactics to get out of that?
Well, first of all, I want to recommend a book, not one of mine. It's called The War of Art. It's a play on words, not the art of war, Sun Tzu, but the
Is that Stephen
war.
Pressfield?
Yeah, Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The
Yeah.
Gates of Fire and Legend of Bagger Vance and so on. Excellent book. And it's all about procrastination and how to overcome it. That gives it a full treatment. But I don't really have any hacks or tips other than you just sit down and start typing. You could even type, I don't feel like writing right now, or I'm worried about what I'm going to be writing, and start. Then now you're writing something. And gee, I wonder why, like this dialogue by yourself. And that works into, well, maybe and then pretty soon you're writing something. So, they say that perfect is the enemy of good.
Yes.
Trying to make it so perfect. But it's a very, very common, Ernest Hemingway said the first draft of anything is crap. And we have to, in fact, a chapter in a book on writing that I wrote with my daughter, Sierra, called The Creative Compass. We have a chapter in there called Permit Yourself to Write Badly, so that then you can learn to write well. But we have to give ourselves permission, because that castle we had in our mind in the dream phase of writing, when it's the drafting phase and we look at it on the page, it's more like a garden tool shed. And that's when we have to do the renovations and start rewriting and rewriting. We have to accept that as part of the process, thinking, oh, this is not very good. Maybe I'm not a writer or cut out for this. No, that's just the beginning. And it happens with almost every book that I've ever written. And then, but I love rewriting. So anyway, for writers out there and any creative artist, it's going to be the same with painting, blocking things out and trying to envision, put on the page what you picture, photography, anything. I think
even beyond a creative process.
Mm-hmm.
I think this could be applied to anything, and a truism that, or at least an idea that I try to keep in mind is start before you're ready. Because I think we often, before we make changes in our life, in any which way, that could be moving to a new place or taking a new job or steering our work or family life in a new direction, we go, I'm not ready yet.
Right.
We're not prepared enough yet. We need to have more pieces of the puzzle, or all of the things, our T's crossed and our I's dotted and all the rest of it. But actually, I think when we can start making moves before we feel ready as such, that's when the magic starts to really happen.
Good point. I mean, self-doubt is one of those major hurdles. It's a facet of what we call fear. I do, obviously, teaching peaceful warrior trainings. I do discuss and we work with the element of fear quite a bit and overcoming fear. And one of the best quotes I could share with your viewers is by Cus D'Amato. He was a boxing coach. And he said, heroes and cowards feel exactly the same fear. They just respond differently. And so we can't even show courage unless we're feeling afraid. And by the way, that brings me to one of the most controversial things that I teach that I've ever said. And it bears a little bit of explanation. And it is this: I don't encourage people to feel confident or courageous or happy or kind or loving or peaceful. I encourage them to behave that way. Now, you can see why that's a controversial statement, because people say, wait a minute, you mean you can be feeling one way and behaving another? Isn't that pretense? Isn't that unauthentic? But I would ask someone, what if you saw a toddler walking into a busy traffic street, cars whipping by, and you're terrified to run out in the street. You could get hit, but you find yourself doing it. And while you're terrified, you're picking up that child and taking them to safety. Now, was that pretense? Was it inauthentic? Or is there certain virtue in feeling afraid and behaving with courage? Because it's not about not feeling fear. The idea of being fearless is nonsense. People don't survive long if they're fearless. Fear is a the saying, fear is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. So we don't want it to master us, but it can serve us. It can tell us to avoid a situation. I mean, instinctually, that's part of our makeup. So, and the same way, someone can feel shy and go up and meet somebody and introduce themselves while feeling shy. They can feel angry and say a kind word to someone, as radical as that may sound. So that comes back to that idea we have more control over what we actually do and bring into life, rather than from the dream phase of this inner subjectivity. And what am I thinking? What am I feeling about all this? Barbara Rasp, a wonderful writer, once said, the lesson is simple, the student is complicated.
That is so true. I had that as a few simple lessons that sprung to mind, or kind of quotes as you were saying that, because there are a few things I read recently, like your life will expand or shrink in direct proportion to your courage.
Right.
And
Right.
I've seen that, and I think that's why sometimes it can potentially get more difficult as you get older, as you've got the weight of experience behind you, and perhaps you have made some choices and realized that you potentially did shrink away in fear instead of taking that action. I think we all end up on the path we're supposed to in some respects, but it can be confronting, I suppose.
Well, yes. And again, it shrinks or expands in proportion to our courage. But again, if we understand courage as a behavior rather than just a feeling, I think that makes a huge difference, because courage is an action. Confidence is an action. I'm behaving with confidence right now. Do I feel that way or think that way? Who cares? That's what I'm bringing into life right now.
Yeah. What are some of the extraordinary experiences that you have had personally as a consequence of taking action when you have felt fear, perhaps?
Well, that brings us back to that question you asked at opening, starting over. As anyone who has read my book or seen the Peaceful Warrior movie knows, I had my right thigh bone shattered in about 40 pieces in a motorcycle crash when I was a young man at the peak of my condition. And after going through the hospitalization, the surgery to put a rod down the middle of my bone and all that, and the pain, I had no idea where I was going or what my life was going to be like after that point, whether I'd ever be able to do gymnastics again, much less walk regularly. So there was certainly fear, uncertainty, but I knew I could do some push-ups even before I left my hospital bed. And then when I got out of the hospital, I could start doing strength training. So I just, not knowing, I just kept training. And it did work out in my case. People have been more injured, head injuries and so on, of course, nervous system paralysis. But it was a pretty bad break in terms of my own life. So that was another example of starting over. I had to start fresh, and it led me up a different path.
Because
Now
that put end to your gymnastics career as such.
No, actually, I was able to come back and
Okay.
co-captain the team that won our first national championships. So there was a comeback story that actually happened, and I was chosen as the senior athlete of the year at University of California, among a field of football players and other athletes. And I think it was mostly, I don't know, pity points. But in any case, I was given that accolade just because it was a good comeback story. But that, again, that was just one of those things about responding without knowing, but just doing my best. They say that before the Buddha died, his disciples asked, "Can you give us any last advice?" And he said, "Just do your best."
Whatever that is. Mm-hmm.
whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So winning these awards, captaining the team, what else? I want to hear some of the other things that you've experienced in your life, perhaps a little bit later on in your career that have reflected you choosing to be courageous and take the action necessary. Because we all have different ways that we live our lives, and it's rare that we come across people who have really broken the norm, who challenge what it means to say, okay, mom, dad, society told me that I needed to go and be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or conversely, that was never possible for me and my family. And I have got a small job in my local town, and I haven't dared to expand my vision of what is possible. And I think what I want to share and what I do share through this podcast is the stories of people who go, do you know what? I am going to do things a little bit differently. I am going to be bolder. I am going to be more daring. And look at what this can lead to.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I like to also start from the point of um, it's fine where you are. Where everybody is, it's absolutely perfect on some level. But if their goal, that's what the key is. If they have an aim or a purpose and want to do more, I'm not going to tell people they should do more or wherever they are, and you're not either.
No,
That but if they have an aim or a goal, then there may be a time, and maybe soon, to look into opportunities and to take the risk of failing. I mean, I used to fail 50 times a day in the gym. I would try a new move and crash, try a new move and crash until I learned it. When I was 60 years old, which was 18 years ago, actually, I decided I wanted to learn to ride a unicycle. Now, if anybody has tried riding a unicycle, it's extremely humbling. You get up on it and whoop, goes out from under you. You get up on it again, whoop, goes out from under you.
I have tried.
All right, well, you know what I'm talking about there. And
Yes.
it's quite discouraging. It feels like impossible. You wonder, other people have learned it, but you go, like some people tell me, oh, well, you've done all this, Dan, but that's just you. You're special. No, I'm not. I am not special. Anybody who's achieved anything, a lot of it's luck and timing. But yes, I have worked. We can't control the outcomes in our life, but we can control our efforts. And by making a good effort over time, we increase our odds of getting our desired goal over not making the effort. What was it, Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, who said you make 0% of the shots you don't take?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been willing to fail. I've been willing to look foolish and just go for it. Try it. Break it down into steps. In fact, I advise people dream big, but start small and then connect the dots.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. You seem to be an example of somebody who has a lot of grit. And there's this little simple equation, let's say, in this book by Angela Duckworth, who's a professor in this space on grit and why we should be focusing on that over talent. And what she says is that we have a certain amount of talent, but if we don't exploit that, it doesn't get anywhere. So it's talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement.
I like that. And Muhammad Ali put it this way. He said, it's important to have will and skill. He said, but overall will is more important. I mean, I will myself every morning, whether I feel like it or not, to do my push-ups, to do my workout. My wife and I both do calisthenics and TheraBand and a bunch of stuff for strength and flexibility. And I do a 4-minute peaceful warrior workout, which I created in 1985 every day. Every day. It's part of my overall workout. Do I always feel like it? No, but the will is the key. Just do it. It comes down to that. But it's not about I have some innate grit that other people don't have. Grit is measured by what you actually do. And if you start doing something regularly,
It becomes a habit. It becomes a habit.
It becomes a habit. And it takes usually most people around 30 days. So their subconscious says, oh, we have a pattern here. We're starting to do something. And then it's like brushing teeth. We just do it. It's part of our daily routine. And that's really helpful Um,
Well,
to
I gotta say, you're looking pretty young.
Yeah, for 78, doing all right.
You're doing all right. I don't know if you want to do some silver fox modeling in the later stages of your life. You
I,
could give it a go.
well, I still do handstands every day, just to keep in practice. The
Yeah.
inventor of the trampoline named George Nissen, I was at his 80th birthday party many years ago. Uh, George died when he was 96 years old, but he pressed to a handstand on a table at his 80th birthday. So I aspire to do the same thing.
Good effort. Good
Yeah.
goal to have. Mindfulness. Now, you mindfulness meditation, you were a bit ahead of the curve in this, I think. And now it's becoming, if it already is, such a buzzword. It's a trend. We are recognizing the positive effects of that. But can you speak to why you think it is so important to live a mindful life?
Yes, there's a short explanation, maybe a little bit longer one that gives some context. First of all, mindfulness, the word, has become a thing. Someone says, I practice mindfulness, as if it's one stop spiritual shopping, as if it's a solution to all our problems. But all mindfulness means is paying attention to what is going on in the present moment, in what's right in front of us, and without judgments, just to pay attention. Now, attention is quite a valuable thing, especially today, because we're so distractible. There's so many quicker and quicker, first they went to Twitter and then Instagram, now TikTok and Snapchat, and these shorter and shorter demands on our attention span that are more and more entertaining. And it's getting harder for people just to sit back and concentrate. Meditation has been defined as the ultimate confrontation with boredom, because you sit, your eyes are closed or half closed, and you don't do anything, and you just wait and start seeing the stream of thoughts going on and all that. Now, so mindfulness again deals with the present moment. What does that mean, the present moment? The Peaceful Warrior movie made a big deal, like, that's my central teaching, all about living in the present. But there's a lot to say for that. And first of all, we have to acknowledge there's no such thing as the present moment. As any physicist will tell you, how do you grasp a nanosecond, a millionth of a second? Where is the present moment? See, when teachers like myself talk about here and now and living in the present, we're just saying handle what's in front of you. Because we have developed, we humans, we have a gift and a curse. And the gift is we have the ability to remember. We have memories we form. We say, but I can learn from this because this happened to me last week. I don't want to do that again. So we have memories of what we call the past. We also have imaginations, great gift, imagination. So it allows us to plan our day or anticipate so we can imagine the future. But what happens is those things can possess us. And most of us, instead of putting our attention in what's in front of us, that seems boring. So we think about, oh, I wish I hadn't said that or done that. Or, we have these set of neural impulses in our brain we call memory, which is the past. And we also have that imagination, what we call the future. But all we really have, the body can only live in this moment and this moment and this moment. It can't go past and future, as far as we know. The mind, though, constantly flits to yesterday and tomorrow and what's going to happen at that meeting I'm going into. Will there be that toxic personality there I have to deal with? And all these complications. But if we want our life to be simple and powerful and sane, the only moment of power and sanity is this moment. If we were sitting across from each other, Shannon, and I took my keys out, a set of keys, and threw them to you and said, catch. While you're reaching for those keys, you would have a cat-like awareness. You'd be reaching right for the keys to grab them and catch them. You wouldn't be thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, right? Or what you did yesterday. You'd be in that moment. In fact, it's impossible to think about anything in the present moment. So if people want a quieter mind, focus on the present. In the present, there's pure awareness. as soon as we start thinking about something, we're thinking about the future or the past. So, and this is the moment of reality. The rest is kind of an illusion. Memories aren't that accurate, and neither is our imagination of the future. So yeah, we can plan our day, but it doesn't usually turn out just the way we plan. So we don't want to get too attached to our plans. We may have to make adjustments. So this is what I mean by the present moment, and the power of it is just to focus on what's in front of us. What do I need to do? What is my purpose right now? And if we do that well, that creates the quality of our life.
Mm. It reminds me, I think, of an early internship I had when I left university, and I was concerned with all these questions of where I was taking my life and where it was going, like so many people as you're trying to find your path. And a manager turned and said to me, what I've found is if you just focus on doing this moment well, the rest will figure itself out.
Yeah.
And it really stuck with me, because I hadn't heard of that. And I think I'd realized on reflection in my own life, I'd been so fixated with the future. And like you say, in many respects, it's an illusion because it doesn't exist. It's just a mental image, a picture of what could be. And then at the same time, you need a little bit of that to give yourself direction in your life. So it's definitely striking a balance between how you can do what is necessary, use your mind as a tool rather than be used by it and misled by it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And that's why it's a blessing and a curse, because we have a habit of living in the past and future, which complicates our life. But we also have the ability to imagine and plan our day and anticipate and rehearse for a performance or whatever it is we're going to do. Mm-hmm. But I prefer, now is my favorite time.
You'd be surprised how I've done so many interviews now, and I have had more than a few where somebody is entirely unpresent. And by that, I mean very much not focused on this conversation. And I can feel it and I can see it. Or there'd be people reaching for a telephone or looking at their computer or quickly typing a message. And it's very striking because sometimes it's with people who often speak about self-development as well.
Yeah, attention is a zero-sum game. I think the biggest gift we can give anyone in our families, with children, our spouses, our friends, is true attention, to be there and be present with them and listen to what's going on and respond to the moment. Because many of us, as you noted, don't do that.
No.
And it's a great gift. It's a zero-sum game, attention. Many people are they say, oh, I can multitask. I can do two things at once. But actually, you really can't. Because if it's 100% attention, you're either turning your attention to one thing or the other. Like if I glance up at the clock right now, if I look up at the clock, what time is it? I'm no longer attending to you at all. I'm just attending to the clock. There's a Zen joke that we really can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Because if we're thinking about chewing gum and putting our attention there, we're not really thinking about our feet and walking. And if we think about our walking, we're not really that attentive to how we're chewing the gum. So we've all had the experience of talking with someone on the telephone and they're only half present. They're checking their email at the same time or playing a game on the computer or whatever. We can tell, as you noted, that in podcast interviews. So people who think they multitask, it's fine. I mean, but even when juggling, and I sometimes teach juggling at some of my trainings, even when juggling 3 balls, let's say, in the air, you are actually focusing on throwing one, then throwing another, then throwing another, and throwing well so you can catch each one. It's not really doing 3 things at once. It's doing one thing and staying present. It's easy to be present when you're swinging around a horizontal bar in gymnastics, or
when it feels good, when it feels good. That's the other thing, right? We're like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to live in this present moment when I got a nice cocktail and a nice view. But what about when it's not so great?
Well, how about the dentist? How about getting our teeth cleaned?
Yeah.
There was a time. There was a time that I did an experiment my dentist said I needed a filling in my tooth. And I said, all right, today don't give me any painkiller, don't give me any Novocaine, just drill away. And I focused. I wasn't trying to get elsewhere. I wasn't thinking about something else to escape the situation. The opposite. I focused on the very tip of the drill and what was going on with and in my tooth. And through the process, it wasn't a super deep filling, but it was enough where I felt some discomfort for sure. And yeah, it hurt like hell, but there was no fear because I was just focused on how interesting, exquisite the experience was. But there wasn't fear. Fear and pain are two different things. And in fact, people have asked me, Dan, today is so stressful. What can we do about stress today? And in fact, after giving a talk at a college, a young man came up to me and said, Dan, I heard you do one-on-one consultations with people sometimes, but you must charge a lot of money for your time. He said, what can you tell a poor college student for $1? And he handed me his dollar.
Bless him.
And I gave him 6 words, which are actually a lifetime practice. And those 6 words were here and now, breathe and relax. And the reason I mentioned this in response to what we were talking about a minute ago is that stress is a part of everyday life. Sometimes we feel a little bit, sometimes we feel a lot. Some people feel stressed on the sports field, but not so much at a party. Other people are stressed at the party, the more social engagement. They don't know what to do, and less so on the sports field. So it can vary. We have different stresses based on our meanings and the meanings we make of things. And I can tell people how to get rid of all stress. That's easy. Just don't care about anything. But that's not very realistic advice because most of us do care. We're engaged. We're attached to our loved ones. We care what happens to them. We care about our work. So stress is going to be a part of life. However, it's not stress that hurts us. Stress is a word we have for perhaps a pressure in our head or a tension in our body. But what is stress? Show it to me. Put it in my hand. I tell people, I want to see what it looks like because it's different for each person. But we all kind of agree, yeah, this is stressful, this isn't. Well, the problem with stress is the tension that goes along with it. And as it happens, the good news is we have full control over whether we take a deep breath. I can do that right now. I have full control, and so do you and all your viewers, is with whether we are tense or not. We can tense our bodies, or we can relax our bodies. And can you imagine sitting someplace or standing someplace or walking someplace and you're completely relaxed and you're saying to yourself, wow, this is so stressful. But that's not a big deal because stress without tension is a very different creature than stress plus tension. So it's the tension that creates the high blood pressure, the hypertension, and all that stuff. That's not good for us, affects our immune system and so on. But if we can relax and breathe whenever we feel we're in a stressful situation, that reduces it to like an antidote or a vaccination to stressful situations. Very practical.
I've never thought of it that way in terms of the stress and the tension. And it's almost like I have heard it in relation to fear. Like with fear, we often fear feeling fear. So we add another layer onto it because we're like, I don't want to be afraid and I'm afraid of being afraid. And I think there's the unnecessary additional psychological layers that we impose on ourselves.
Good point.
Our
the complications.
Our minds, the complications. Let's be so simple. So before we finish up, I want to circle back around to the first book. The one that people probably know you for the most, Peaceful Warrior. What does it mean to be a peaceful warrior?
Well, that's a very good question, and it sounds like an oxymoron. It sounds like, well,
Well,
isn't that
that's it.
paradox? How can you be peaceful and a warrior? Well, I had to acknowledge. Now, I have a background in the martial arts. I started martial arts before gymnastics, judo, and then karate, and then Okinawan style karate, then aikido. I got a black belt in aikido, so if I'm ever attacked on the street, I can whip out my certificate. Um, so, and then I studied other arts, Tai Chi and Russian martial art called Sistema, and some elements from the Filipino art. So I have a martial background, and I have to acknowledge there are people who are true warriors who put themselves in harm's way. Firefighters, police, military. Um, they are actual literal warriors. Not all of them have a peaceful heart. And there are people who are peacemakers. We see today, maybe they wear all white and have love beads and they do a lot of yoga. They're nourishing, they're kind, they're loving, but not all of those can draw on the warrior spirit when they need it. So, what I mean by peaceful warrior is really all
Mm.
of us, you, me, everyone I know, is striving to live with a more peaceful heart. But there are times we have to acknowledge we need a warrior's spirit just to roll up our sleeves and march into life. Whether we feel like it or not, whether we're feeling afraid or timid or shy, whatever those feelings are that pass through us like the weather, we need to say, what will I bring to the world? And so that's what it means, peaceful warrior. That's where the term came from. I was teaching a martial arts course at Oberlin College, where I was a professor at the time, and I was teaching Aikido and Tai Chi, two arts I'd studied. And I was going to call it for the school catalog, The Way of the Warrior. But then that's when a light bulb happened, a light bulb moment. I said, wait, why don't I call it? Because these arts are internal arts, both of them. They're not aggressive arts, they're more
Mm.
receptive. And so I said, why don't I call it The Way of the Peaceful Warrior? So when I finally wrote the book, I thought that might be a good title, The Path or the Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And so that's why it's about all of us. We're all peaceful warriors in training in the school of everyday life. That's how I
Mhm.
view it.
I particularly liked it because I think it demonstrates something that we all should be striving for in all areas of our life, and that is balance.
Right.
And not having too much of any one thing, like everything in moderation. And so I loved that you put that together. And I think that's a beautiful image of what it means to live a full life as well, because you can see the pitfalls of having too much on either side.
Good point. And also, it's interesting, Shannon, for 40 years, I've been teaching, more than 40 years, actually, the kind of work I do, this approach to living. And you may have seen at some seminar sites or residential workshop sites, usually it's about 90 to 95% women.
Yes.
You may have noticed that. And many of the weekend workshops I teach, it's often mostly women there. But my workshops for 40 years, whether it's meditation where I'm teaching, whether it's knife fighting, for 14 years, I taught a personal growth and insight training through knife fighting. No
Wow.
matter what kind, yeah,
Okay.
but no matter what kind of training that I taught, almost equal, 50% male, 50% female.
Mm.
So it's different from the normal personal growth seminar types because of the balance, again, as you say,
Hmm.
balance, peaceful heart, warrior spirit. So it's really because I don't speak to men's groups, I don't speak to women's groups, I speak to human beings stumbling toward the light, just like I am.
Yeah, that's it. I'm going to move into the final fast few questions.
Sure.
And the first thing I wanted to ask is there something that you used to believe about yourself that you no longer believe?
There was a time when I was really a loner. I felt more secure when I was by myself. I felt more self acceptance than accepted by others. And uh, relationship was difficult for me.
Mm.
But that shifted once I stepped into that arena of relationship and the challenge, having children, raising them, and seeing all my shadow side and my weaknesses and foibles. Um, Once I chose that direction, reflected back, in my relationships, I believe that humbled me, also humanized me, and made me able to relate to people and to accept myself more. So I'd say that's would be my response to your question.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful and very honest. Second, what is a piece of, well, a piece of advice, let's say, that you would give to a younger generation or perhaps even your younger self?
Well, I'd say the younger generation right now, uh,
Hmm.
not just my younger self, because when I was young, it was a different world we lived in.
Yes, fair.
Pre-internet, pre-smartphones, pre-social media. And the advice that really is heartfelt is please don't compare yourself to anyone else. Because when we compare ourselves to someone else, we're going to feel superior or inferior. And it's a profound disrespect for our own process. What I mean by that is when I was teaching gymnastics, I noticed that some people learned to say a somersault faster and easier than other people. Maybe they had the right background. But I also noticed that those who took longer to learn it often learned it better than those who learned it faster.
Hmm.
So we each need to respect our own way of learning and our own way of living. So don't compare. There's nothing innately bad about social media. But young people today, what they're seeing on TikTok and whether it's Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, whatever it is, they're seeing other people at their best when they're looking their best and when they're showing off how where they travel and the friends they have and the fun they have. And then they get depressed because they compare themselves to that person instead of recognizing our innate unity, that in a way their joy is also our joy. They're a member of our human tribe. And to be able to celebrate with them. And also at the same time to recognize every one of us has our own battles to fight. Those kids in school who were the elite group who paid little attention to me, they were having their emotional issues as well, their struggles at home, their insecurities, their self-doubts. But we don't see that about other people. We think they're happier than we are or more successful. And can take a long time to learn that lesson. But that's the advice I would give. Just don't compare yourself. And even people my age, don't compare yourself to your younger self. I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. Just stop comparing and start enjoying yourself, your own process, your own life, and
Yes.
respecting yourself.
Yeah. That is a word of wisdom for sure. And to finish up, Dan, what is a closing message that you would give anyone listening who is on this journey of healing, of self discovery, of a path to a greater, better, happier life?
Well, it would be related to the advice I just gave, but it's more a sense of to accept and to trust the life you're living, to accept your process wherever you are now is just perfect. And it's a good exercise. Whenever you run into something that's a struggle, it's like, in what way might this be perfect? In other words, a perfect part of my process, of my life unfolding, of my evolution. So to trust your life unfolding um, and know with security that your life, you're embraced by the arms of spirit. Um, and by spirit, I just mean life, energy, nature, all that is. Uh, and to learn to love yourself as much as you might love someone else. To also
Mm,
really accept uh, that each of our stories is unique. There's not a single story on the planet exactly like ours.
isn't that
So we need
true?
to treasure our own story.
We do. We do. Here and now, breathe and relax. Thank you so much, Dan.
It was my pleasure.